I recently traveled to 3 different countries, and when I returned, I had acquired over 50 video games. How bad was the damage, and why did I not just buy these at home? Well, I live in Denmark, and if you know one thing about Denmark, it's maybe Lego, Danishes, The Little Mermaid, which, fun fact, my great-great-great-grandfather cast in bronze. But what you may not know besides that last fact is that it's surprisingly difficult to find video games, especially retro ones. You can of course find most of the stuff on the net these days, but that's not as fun as traveling to Britain, Canada, and Spain. So that's what I did. I'm Felix from Nintendo Live, and this is how I accidentally ended up spending a lot of money on video games while traveling around the world. First off, is it just impossible to find video games in Denmark? Of course not. We have websites equivalent to Craigslist where you can occasionally find people selling out in their collection. But since we're only 6 million people in Denmark, the chances that you find the exact game you're looking for in your area, or even at all, is pretty slim. But what about in-game stores? Well, we used to have a GameStop in my area, but it unfortunately closed. Now, my only luck is going to an electronics store because there they have the newly released AAA games, or going to this tiny little retro store which does sell a few video games, but their prices are so insanely high and the selection is so minimal that it's not even worth considering. My dream would be going into a store and seeing some more obscure Switch titles, maybe some used Wii and DS games on the shelf as well, but a year ago this was something that I had completely written off. As for the used Wii and DS games that I grew up with, well, those games were from a different era that just wasn't being sold anymore, and obscure Switch titles, well, your best bet would be the internet. But oh man, would my world soon broaden drastically, as I went on the trip that would kickstart this incredible adventure and also change how I viewed upon video game collecting forever. The destination was England, more specifically London, because I was going there to meet my co-hosts and good friends Alex and Sion, and they had both been so incredibly kind to bring a gift each. What they may not have known, however, is that these 2 gifts would play a crucial role in this story. A 2DS from the lovely Alex, and a repro of Mother 3 from the wonderful Sion. Incredibly kind gifts from these 2, but I was in a pickle. I didn't own a single 3DS game to play on the 2DS, and I didn't own a Game Boy Advance to play Sion's copy of Mother 3. Oh no! But I was in London of all places, and I had been told that there was multiple stores that sold secondhand gaming, which was just unheard of compared to Denmark. And as a cherry on top, well, it's a pretty big cherry, but Comic-Con was happening while I was in town. And not just any Comic-Con, it was the first Comic-Con since COVID had happened, so it was a pretty big deal to a lot of people. Now, I had never been to a convention like this before, but I knew I wanted to go, and it turned out to be just the most amazing time ever! Cosplay, performances, meet and greets, and most important of all, hundreds of little stands that sold everything a 20-year-old boy who loves video games would enjoy. And here there was something that particularly caught my eye. A Game Boy Advance SP that had the shell of a Super Famicom, and well, you can probably tell how that story went. Now I finally had a proper way to play Sion's gift, being Mother 3, but I still needed 3DS games to play on Alex's 2DS. If I had had to go on my own, I would have probably been pretty lost, because this was one of the first times I'd ever been in London. I wouldn't have known where to look and even what stores to seek out, but I was in luck again, because Sion was meeting up with a good pal of his, John from Good Vibes Gaming. They would be going on a trip around London visiting video game stores, and I was incredibly excited when they told me I could tag along. This was Sion's first time in Europe, he's from the US, so John had been so kind to lay out a route of us going to video game stores that they didn't have over there. But lucky for me, we don't have any of these stores where I live either, so it went kinda like this. John being the cool uncle, and me and Sion being 2 starstruck little kids not believing what we're seeing with our own eyes. For Sion, it was the fact that everything was so different compared to back in the States, and for me, well, it was just the fact that they had something. Retro video games, retro consoles, it was kinda hard to believe, and the prices weren't even that bad. Now, I owned a fair amount of DS and Wii games when growing up, but most of the copies had either been lost or been so scratched and damaged that they weren't playable anymore, so I was ready to refill those holes in my collection. I picked up games like Mario Kart DS, Wii Sports, Wii Play, but I was also intrigued by a lot of games that I hadn't had in my collection before, like Meteos, Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D, Tomodachi Life, Super Mario 3D Land, WarioWare Smooth Moves, and this is where the list really starts to go a bit bananas. See, I had a gaming hunger after I've just landed this job a few months prior, and I just wanted to absorb and experience as many games as possible so I could be at my very best when presenting for you guys. The activity was so fun that a few days later I asked my partner if she wanted to go out and seek out even more of these CEX shops, because I had looked it up and there was a whopping 20 of these in London. That is just absolutely bonkers. On these travels, I would find games like Burst Junior Jungle Party, which has incredibly high sentimental value to me, and Eastward, which I didn't even know had a physical release on Switch. And this is where another revelation happened to me, because not only is it possible to buy retro video games and consoles in actual stores, it is also possible to find rarer Switch games on the counter, which is just such a surreal thought compared to what we have here in Denmark. And this subject is something that would be explored even further on my next big trip a year after, being my trip to Canada. This trip took place around 1 year after the trip to England, and in the time between I had really taken a liking to collecting video games, buying up multiple games from people on Danish Craigslist, and also finding a few stores that sold 3DS games and whatnot. But it just wasn't the same as going into a real life store and finding used video games, rare Switch games, and that's why I was absolutely ecstatic when my friend from Canada told me that we would be going to flea markets and retro video game stores. There was just one small hurdle though, and that was, of course, I was in a different region, meaning that 3DS games and Wii games were a no-go since those are region locked. And that was a shame, not gonna lie, but luckily, DS games, Game Boy Advance games, and of course Switch games were still on the table. My friend, who me and my partner were staying at, lived very close to a store called PNP Games. Now this store is kinda like CEX, but you can also buy completely new games, and because PNP Games has teamed up with limited run games and special reserve games, you can find even rarer Switch games there in physical form in store, like TMNT Shredder's Revenge and Card Shark. I couldn't pass up on the opportunity. One of the following days, we also went to a flea market, and this was again so different to what I knew back home. In Denmark, flea markets are used clothes, antique furniture, and you are not finding video games there. If you are, it's like FIFA 12 for the Xbox 360. But here there were stands completely dedicated to selling retro video game stuff. And here's where my eye spotted Mario vs. Donkey Kong for the Game Boy Advance. This was the last game I needed to complete my Mario vs. Donkey Kong collection. I had every single game besides the one that started it all. So I talked to the vendor and, well, the rest is history. I finally have my complete collection of Mario vs. Donkey Kong. Another surprise was that GameStop just hadn't closed over there. It was so nostalgic walking into this almost identical looking store to the one I used to buy video games in as a kid. Here I bought a ton of games that I'd never seen on the shelf in Denmark before, like Untitled Goose Game, Bayonetta 1, and Omori. And lastly, we went to this retro store which sold everything from plushies, comics, but most prominent on display was video games. Here I managed to snatch up Game Boy Advance titles like Yoshi's Island and Mario Golf Advance. And this is also where I probably got the coolest thing on the trip, because, I mean, it isn't a video game, but it's still video game related, and I still thought I'd share it because it got this reaction out of me when I found it on the shelf. Oh my god, they have the third, I have the second, oh my, I'm getting this. This is a series of small Animal Crossing New Horizons figurines that I actually started collecting when I went to Comic-Con in England. Here I got the first 2 packs, which I've had proudly on display on my background for a good while now. But I had no idea third one was even out yet, so I was just in complete disbelief when I saw the third one, and only the third one, there on the shelf. I was a really happy boy. I also bought some DS games here like Lego Rock Band, Up, and Diddy Kong Racing DS. And a really cool thing about DS games from North America is that the boxes are way smaller and are not transparent. But best of all, the spines actually look good. Here in Europe, this is what we got, just plain old text, and as you can see, it's a massive downgrade. Oh, I also bought this game, which I'm playing right now, and it's a goddamn masterpiece. Why are you so good? I could go on about this trip for hours, because there was just so much I got to experience for the very first time. See a basketball game, drink root beer, and actually finding some cool video games at flea markets. This wouldn't have been possible without the friend I was visiting, who wished not to be disclosed, but I just wanted to say I really appreciate you, because you made this trip one of my favorite of all time. The only real downside I can think of was that I wasn't able to buy Wii or 3DS games because of the region locking, but that problem would soon be fixed as I went on my third and last trip. The trip to Spain! One month later, me and my partner had just flown into Spain to visit some of my family. I'm half Spanish, and we had to take the bus from the airport to the train station. But we accidentally took the bus one stop too long. It wasn't a problem, we had time to spare, but suddenly my partner says, "Hey, isn't that?" And then I turned around and it was a CEX shop? I had no idea these were even a thing down here, even though I've visited multiple times, and that we found one in the town that we are laying over just by coincidence for taking the bus one stop too long. Well, it was fate itself. We went in not really knowing what to expect, but oh man was I overblown by the amount of Wii games they had on display that I had actively been searching for here in Denmark, but to no luck. Rayman Raving Rabbids, Mario Power Tennis, Wii Music, all games that I had played a ton as a kid, but the most exciting thing of them all, Mario Party 8. This was the Mario Party game when I grew up. I played it all the time, be it alone or when I had friends over, but when I dusted off that old copy, it was unfortunately so scratched that it couldn't even get past the main title screen. I was gutted. I tried looking around for it here, but the used copies were going for $37 to $45, which I'm just not gonna pay for that game. But here it was, for only $24, which is still some, but a much nicer price. Some days later, we had traveled to a bit of a smaller town. I think there was 50,000 inhabitants here, and would you believe it, they also had a CEX shop here. So we of course went inside, and the first thing we saw was this. What? Kid Icarus Uprising with the manual for only €25. This was a game I'd been looking everywhere for, and I just couldn't find it here in Denmark. It was not being sold, and with the 3DS shop now closed, this is a price that will just go higher and higher. And here it was, albeit in Spanish, but it's €25 for Kid Icarus Uprising. I honestly still can't believe it. It was one of the best deals of my entire life. That aside, we then traveled to the final town we were staying at, and they, for some reason, also had a CEX. I don't know what's going on anymore. Although it was really cool there was a CEX shop here, the prices weren't really the best. Professor Layton 1 and 2 were both going for €28 each. I want in on the series, but not for that price, I'm afraid. The only game I got here was Picross 3D, and the reason I got it was because I recently bought Picross 3D Round 2 for the 3DS, and that's a really good game, so I wanted to complete the tiny collection. Picross 3D, however, turned out to be the last game I bought on this Spain trip, thus concluding this massive game haul that spanned 3 countries and had over 50 video games in it. But that begs the question, how much did I exactly spend on video games in other countries? Well, when adding together the prices of the video games plus the handheld consoles I bought, we get a number that is way higher than I could have ever anticipated. An absolutely huge number, which I am a bit embarrassed about. But do I regret this? Not at all. Now I have 50 plus video games in my collection, where some of them wake up feelings I'd totally forgotten, where others are just really good games I haven't gotten around to play yet. But most importantly, they all have a really cool backstory of how I got them, instead of just being, oh, I bought them digitally or in an electronic store. Video game collecting has become one of my favorite hobbies in my day-to-day life. But it's not just a hobby, it's actually something that's very beneficial to me because of the field of work I'm in. And that just wouldn't be possible without any of you watching, so I wanted to take a moment and say thank you. And also thank you for making it to the end of this video and listening to this crazy massive adventure that helped shape the video game collector I am today. Let us know down in the comments below some of your experiences and stories about buying video games and whatnot. And don't forget to check out our website nintendolife.com for all sorts of Nintendo related content. Stay safe, play some video games, buy some video games, and I'll see you in the next one. Felix from Nintendo Life, out.